Hello and welcome to World Talks. I'm your host, Sasha Farbach. Now, the deadly aftermath of Russia's missile strikes on Sumy has intensified Ukraine's call for stronger air defenses, while President Zelensky's push for more Patriot systems faces skepticism from Washington. Meanwhile, President Trump has accused President Zelenskyy of prolonging the war, further complicating the diplomatic landscape. As Ukraine navigates these challenges, Vladimir Putin has finally outlined his terms for a lasting peace deal, demanding significant territorial concessions. But Ukraine's response remains resolute. Its sovereignty is non-negotiable. And now to discuss it all further, I'm joined by Mackay, CEO, Grey Bull Rescue Group. Thanks so much for coming on the program. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So also to have some context here, I do want to share this recent statement by a representative of the Foreign Office in Ukraine, just exactly about this. What is Ukraine's response to the recent statements by Vladimir Putin? Let's listen to that now.
Not even 1 month has passed since the agreement was made, but Russia has already violated this agreement over 30 times, meaning more than once a day, probably, if you take it on average, with damaging our critical energy grid, our critical energy objects. So unfortunately, we can see these Russian violations, and we're sharing them with the United States and with other partners and with all relevant international organizations and institutions. We still abide as the Ukrainian state by this agreement with the United States.
So there we have a rather sober assessment here by the representative of the Foreign Office in Ukraine. So 30 times violation, that's the latest count. So where are we right now? How do you assess this statement and the future of any potential negotiations in the state of play right now between Russia, the United States, and Ukraine?
I think it's an accurate statement. I think what we see here is Russia in violation of the ceasefire, and in effect a one-sided ceasefire, because, as he mentioned, Ukraine, for its part, abides by it. And notice what we have not seen. We have not seen strikes by Ukrainian drones, for example, on oil terminals, electrical substations, and other energy infrastructure in the Russian Federation, as we were seeing up until the point of this agreement. What we see is a one-sided ceasefire, which Ukraine observes in good faith and Russia violates in bad faith. And I don't think enough attention is drawn to that. And Ukraine is attempting to do this by pointing out these repeated violations by the Russian Federation.
Mm-hmm. Now, we have the repeated violations. We have the terrible imagery as well in the last few days, which just happened in Sumy. Very, very tragic. But is this resonating at all with Donald Trump? I mean, at this point, he keeps dismissing it. Is this having any impact on him? Will this reflect in some way in policy? Will he bring Russia to heel somehow?
No, it doesn't resonate with him because nothing will. What we see here is evidence, facts, reality, and this does not have any influence on Donald Trump. He is influenced solely by his perception and his strong bias towards Russia. So instead of seeing, for example, sympathy for the victims of the attacks on Sumy and also on Kryvyi, we see instead constant apologies for Russia, no sympathy whatsoever to Ukrainians. When Ukrainians offer to buy missile defense systems, not ask for them to be given, but buy them, they are dismissed with disdain by Donald Trump, who then launches a personal attack on President Zelenskyy. So I don't think that the reality of Russia violating the ceasefire and never intending to respect any ceasefire will not reach Donald Trump ever.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned their air defense. I mean, this has all become more critical. I mean, it's a song that the Ukrainians have sung for a long time, trying to get more systems. These are key. What do you make of this latest pitch by President Zelenskyy? Do you think that partners here will be any more forthcoming given these recent attacks? As we said, this constant violation of Russians?
They should be, but the United States will not be. don't forget that one of the reasons why there's an even greater need for Ukrainians to get proper air defense systems now, which they've needed really for the last 3 years, is that they are not striking the missile launch sites and air bases in the Russian Federation that they could because they're respecting the ceasefire. So in a way, Ukraine is being punished twice over, not allowed to prevent these attacks from occurring as well as they are able to, and not able to defend against them when they're occurring. So it's, of course, frustrating. I would say that it's an insane situation.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said that it's interesting that they're kind of holding back at this point. They're respecting this kind of semi-ceasefire, if we can call it that, to a certain degree. Will there come a point where the Ukrainians will then just continue to strike back, as we've just highlighted in those key areas?
I think so. And this will be because of Ukraine's increased domestic production. So, for example, the Neptune cruise missile, which they've developed domestically and has an more and more extended range. They don't need the permission of the Americans or anyone to do this. And as I said, as well as they are able, Ukrainians will defend their homeland from this foreign invasion, and as we would expect them to do. And if the United States isn't willing to help, if it's actually an impediment, then it somehow has to be sidelined. So, of course, encouraging other European allies to do more, but Ukraine realizes that more and more they're on their own, and they are coming up with that capability. Mm-hmm. So I think, once it's clear to everyone, I think now, that Russia is not negotiating for peace or even a ceasefire or a truce, and that the rhetoric of the American administration will simply be ignored as Ukraine defends itself properly as well as able with the support of its European allies.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's obviously the hope that America will come to the aid of Ukraine more, that air defense systems, we're still holding out on what will happen in Germany with those Taurus missiles as well. But at the same time, interesting point you made there about how Ukraine is very much doing its own thing as well in terms of trying to build up the missile capabilities. Do you think that there will come a time when they'll have the capabilities and the capacity to, well, at least to some degree, provide what they need also to defend themselves?
I think the time is now. They've already done it. Don't forget that Ukraine sank the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet with a domestically designed and produced missile. And we see this increasingly. I believe President Zelenskyy made a statement even today that somewhere around 40% of all weapons used in Ukraine now are domestically produced. And that proportion is going to be increasing. At the same time, it's been revealed that Russia is getting more than half of its ammunition from North Korea. So I think the tide of production favors Ukraine over the long term. I think it's up to the rest of us to do what we can to help Ukraine. And I think not just giving weapons, but for example, the Danish-led initiative about funding domestic production of weapons in Ukraine, that model has proven to be very effective. Denmark realizing that they've got more cash than weapons at the moment, saying, well, then why don't we fund this capacity that Ukraine has, an untapped capacity to produce weapons and ammunition and, as I said, defend itself properly.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that defense will be key. I want to come back to diplomacy for a moment, because in that same statement from the foreign minister in Ukraine, very clear words, I'm just quoting here, Ukraine is a sovereign country united within internationally recognized borders. This position of Ukraine is immutable and will never change. So, and we have this recent Witkoff visit to Moscow, where very much Putin has outlined these 5 regions that he wants. So with these two statements here, where does that leave us? And can Ukraine here be persuaded? Can Russia be persuaded to pull back? What do we take these two statements, and what does the international community do here to find peace?
What we're taking from these two statements is that they are so radically incompatible that there can be no compromise between them. It's like choosing to being murdered and not being murdered. It's not that we can go halfway on this. So the position of Ukraine, that Ukraine is a sovereign country and has territorial integrity within its 1991 borders, is the only position that can possibly lead to peace. The position, which is not really Witkoff's, but it's actually Russia's maximal position that these 4 regions, and don't forget Crimea, so we're really talking about 5 regions, belong to Russia, even though they've only fully occupied one of them. This is insane. It leads to partial occupation of Ukraine, captivity for millions of Europeans under the yoke of Moscow, and perpetuates the war. So it's not possibly a path to peace. So these two positions are not negotiating stances. They're just the choice between a path to peace, which is Ukrainian sovereignty, and a path to perpetual war, which is Russian occupation.
Mm-hmm. I know it's the question of, our current century, but how do you assess with what we've just discussed in terms of what could be next? Where are we in this deadlock that seems to be going nowhere? What's next for Ukraine, and what could possibly a scenario here in the medium term?
I think not just for Ukraine, but for the West, we have an opportunity now to bring an end to the Moscow Empire that we have not had in over 100 years since the First World War. The opportunity, the First World War was the great collapse of empires, the end of the Ottoman Empire, the end of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, really the end of the German Empire, although it made an attempt to revive itself, of course, with the Second World War. But the opportunity in 1919 was lost with the rise of Bolshevik Russia. The opportunity at the end of the Second World War was lost with the Yalta Agreement, gave away Eastern Europe to the Moscow Empire. The opportunity was lost at the end of the Cold War when, for unknown reasons, the Russian Federation, this rump state, was taken to be the successor state of the Soviet Union. But Ukraine has given us the opportunity now to dismantle the Moscow Empire, which has to be done. The age of empires should have ended with the 19th century.
And with that, well, it's a really fascinating point I want to go into more. Unfortunately, we'll have to conclude it there, but very much historically and also what happens in the future, very interesting. Look, I want to thank you very much, Mackay there. Thank you for all your insights tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay tuned. Much more coming up right here on TVP World. Goodbye.